Hi, I'm Danny Nathan. Welcome to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. This show is for the people who refuse to settle. The misfits, the rebels, and the troublemakers. It's for the square pegs and for those who have a healthy disrespect for the status quo. This show is for the people who feel compelled to push ideas through the corporate red tape and for the challengers who can't help but build things better. For the past 2 decades, I've been deep in the work of building, breaking, and rebuilding both existing businesses and new ventures, helping organizations navigate the messy, high-stakes world of creating what's next. And today, I run Apollo 21. We help organizations launch new products, fix broken ones, and rethink how innovation actually happens. Throughout all of that experience, one thing has become clear. Most of what companies call innovation today is just theater. Workshops with post-it notes on the walls, safe bets wrapped in press releases, years of work that results in nothing. If that sounds both frustrating and familiar, you're not alone. I'm not interested in innovation theater. I'm here to help you make innovation something that you do. I'll be hosting conversations with today's operators, people in the trenches who've built things, broken them, fixed them, and then kept going. We'll share raw, honest conversations about what it actually takes to build something new when it feels like the entire system is stacked against you. There's no script, there's no shortcuts or 5 steps to innovation framework. Just the truth about what works, what doesn't, and what it takes to execute today. So hit subscribe and welcome to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die. Hi there, folks. Welcome to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die. I'm Danny, and to kick off our podcast series, I've decided that I'm going to do something a little weird. I'm going to interview myself. So, my guest today is Danny Nathan. Welcome, Danny. Hey, Danny. Thanks for having me. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what drove you to create Innovate, Disrupt, or Die. What's your background in startups, corporate innovation, venture building, the things that you gravitate towards and talk about in both the newsletter and, I presume, in the podcast? I come from a 23-year career now. I started out as an advertising creative and realized very quickly that agencies didn't really grasp the impact that technology was going to have on the way that brands and consumers, customers, people interacted and communicated. And I personally found that very frustrating and took it upon myself to get out of the world of advertising as quickly as possible. To make a long story short, I ended up meeting a crew at a company called Poke here in New York and spent about 5 years working with those guys. And it really just sort of changed my outlook and my perspective on just about everything that I had learned. I had the opportunity to work with companies, brands, products that I would never have touched at a larger organization. So I helped launch global products for Getty Images, for Dyson, for American Express. I led a team that helped build an installation that went in the Museum of Modern Art here in New York. All sorts of crazy, awesome experiences that by definition had to leverage technology in some manner. And so that became my crash course into all things technology and entrepreneurship and so on and so forth. Fast forward, I left there, spent basically the remainder of my career bouncing between founding my own startups or serving usually as head of product for early stage companies. And that, along with the sort of learnings around innovation and customer and user experience, have really come to define how I view the world, particularly around innovation and disruption. And people like to talk about being innovative because it inherently means that they are forward facing, that they are leveraging the newest, latest, and greatest of technology or business models or internal processes, whatever it might be. But the reality is that when you dig into how companies are acting upon the things that they're claiming are innovative, they tend to fall short. It always came across as an unwillingness or to be blunt, a sort of lack of ballsiness about how to approach the world. And what I have come to learn as I've matured throughout my career is that most companies don't fail at innovation because they lack the foresight. They don't fail at innovation because they lack the creativity or because they lack the gumption. Most companies fail at innovation because when you really stop and look at the way that companies are structured, they are structured in a manner that is designed to fight everything that helps to cultivate innovation within a large organization. So companies, as they grow, processes are put in place to set guardrails around how the work happens. And the people who don't color within the lines are the ones who are viewed as difficult to work with. And in reality, there is a moment of frustration around limitations that processes put in place that eliminate the possibility to create new things. So a lot of the metrics that larger companies use, so return on investment, return on net assets, how capital grows within a company structure, are all dependent on measurable quarterly financial returns and bets that look safe and plays that generate efficiency to the point where anything innovative, anything experimental, anything risky doesn't fit within the need to grow those metrics. And so over time, you end up in a situation where companies cannot be innovative because their structures and their metrics prevent it from happening. Okay, what does it really mean to innovate, disrupt, or die? The moment that you become complacent is the moment that you start to die. Somebody will always be coming from behind to try and take away what you've built, to outdo you and to unseat you as the industry incumbent. Innovate, disrupt, or die reminds people, if you're not innovating, if you're not aiming to disrupt yourself or to disrupt continuing opportunistic industries, your company is going to die. And it may not happen tomorrow. Big companies are like big ships. They gain momentum and they're hard to slow down. And so they may last for a while. But the reality is that the moment that you stop focusing on how to continue exploring new business models and new opportunities for growth in areas and amongst customer segments that you're not currently serving, you're on your way downhill. How do you define meaningful innovation versus what a lot of people would just call noise? Noise is the distraction. Noise is the innovation theater. Noise is the stuff that we do to prove outwardly to the world that we are being innovative for whatever that means. It's the press releases, it's the innovation theater, the workshops that you do that make the people that sit high up within the organization feel like they're being innovative, but often have very little impact or result on the way that the company does business, the way that the company interacts with customers, the things that the company offers to customers. I think that meaningful innovation, tangible innovation, actionable innovation has to come from a specific need, be it from the customer or from the organization, that then prompts a new way of thinking about accomplishing whatever that job to be done is, and changes the way that the world thinks about how to make that job happen. That could be something that is cheaper and easier to use, even if it is less feature rich. That could be something that leverages AI in today's parlance. That could be a change in our supply chain that impacts distribution in a way that we hadn't thought of before and ultimately produces savings. And so I think that, if you're looking for meaning in your innovation, you have to think about what is driving the need for the innovation in the first place and align that to some specific need that will have a clear-cut benefit for a clear target. What kinds of innovation do you think matter most today? Product, business model, something else? That's a little bit of a tough one because honestly, innovation can happen in all of those areas. Innovation can be applied to a product, innovation can be applied to a business model, innovation can be applied to an internal process. And so I think that if you approach innovation with a limiting mindset around that happening specifically within the realm of your product or your business model, you are in effect cutting off your nose to spite your face. If you're only going to focus on your product, then you're ignoring the fact that a disruptive product might require changes to your business model, to your distribution strategy, to your supply chain, and change in one place without change in the other ultimately is going to fail. And so I think that you have to look at innovation as a holistic effort across those areas. And sure, you can start with one, start with thinking about how your product can be made better, faster, cheaper, simpler, can be changed to apply to a different customer segment. But you have to remind yourself that once you have determined that changes to your product are necessary, there may be resulting changes to the things that surround the product in order to make those product changes successful. And so you can't necessarily have one without the other. What do you think most people misunderstand about disruption? Most people, when you ask them about disruption, think about big, bold changes to the world that shake up how something happens. What people misunderstand about disruption in the business and innovation context is that disruption, more often than not, starts small. How do you take a technology that exists and rip away some of the features so that you can create something faster, cheaper, easier to use that still solves a very discrete need or job to be done, but for a different market? And so disruption often starts with something that looks like a toy or something that looks like a shitty version of an existing product. And because of that, it often gets dismissed by the incumbents in the space, and larger companies tend to ignore the disruptive startups that are trying to take over their space because those startups look like they are tackling a customer segment that is less opportunistic, less margin rich, less revenue driving than their existing customers. And so often they will ignore that disruptor, or in some cases, they will even partner with that disruptor to offload the low end of their customer base so that they can continue to focus on moving up market. And they do so without the realization that they're inviting their own demise. Because once that disruptive startup or whoever it is comes in and starts attracting that new lower end market, they are now on the path to start moving up market in much the same way that the incumbent probably did originally. They have a lot more runway in front of them. They have a lot more room to grow as they continue to garner new customers and build new features into their product, and will end up eating up the market share of the incumbent with their blessing. And so I think that people expect disruption to be big, bold, and like a bolt of lightning, when in reality, it is often a Happy Meal toy. It's a little thing that you get and you kind of, oh, okay, that's cool. And then you turn around, 6, 12, 18, 24 months later and you go, oh my God, the little toy that came with my hamburger is now suddenly a full-blown product that people are paying for. Have you ever failed at something you believed would be disruptive? Tell us about it. What did you learn? I have a rather unique relationship with failure. I have a personal mantra that is fail beautifully, and it is born out of personal failure and the belief that in spite of what we are taught from a very young age, failure is not a bad thing. Failure is an opportunity to learn and grow and figure out what works, what doesn't, and what to try next. So to be very direct in answering, yes, I have failed many, many times over at things that I thought would be disruptive and that I thought would have an impact on the market. And every time I have learned something about that market, I've learned something about that product and what potentially I did wrong. And more importantly, I've learned about how to approach that moment next time around with greater clarity, with greater care, and how to ask the right questions. So to me, that is what makes a career's worth of learning, is trying, doing, potentially failing, and taking those failures and rolling them into whatever it is you're going to do next, so that you can continue to grow as a person, continue to grow as an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur, and continue to learn how to better approach the ideals of innovation and disruption, so that where you failed this time, perhaps next time you will not. Who did you create Innovate, Disrupt, or Die for? What kinds of people should be paying attention? Who's the target audience? Our audience is really split. It is for people in corporate innovation roles who are either frustrated by what it takes to actually make innovation happen within a large organization. And we are equally targeting entrepreneurs, founders, and startup disruptors who are the folks that are challenging those larger organizations. And so if you look at it kind of as a playing field, the two teams are the incumbent companies that are trying to be innovative to maintain their market share and to grow the value of their organization. And playing against them are the little guys, the challengers, the disruptors who are coming in to say, no, there's a better, faster, easier, cheaper way to accomplish this. We're going to go challenge the Goliath of whatever space they're in and try and make something unique happen. And what I have learned over my career is that ultimately these groups of people are all facing very similar challenges. They're just doing so within the constructs of different organizations with different limitations and enablements. And so if you look at large incumbent companies, they have the distribution networks built. They have the capital and the resources to make interesting, innovative things happen. But as their companies have grown, those organizations have become built around metrics and deliverables that are extremely difficult to cultivate innovation around. And so one of the advantages that founders have is the ability to, of course, move without the constraints of those existing processes. So often you'll hear people in corporate roles talking about acting more like a startup, functioning more like a startup. And in reality, what I think they're bucking their heads against is the difficulties that come from those ingrained processes and the metrics that are guiding the way that their large organization has to grow. And there's a hint of jealousy around, well, look over there, that startup is in our space and they're moving faster, they're breaking things, they're, not living by the same rules that we are. Why can't we do that? And so Innovate, Disrupt, or Die was created for those two audiences to learn from one another and to understand where the limitations around their particular role or endeavor sit, so that they can hopefully work around them, challenge the status quo within their organizations, and learn what guides the thinking, for example, of larger organizations, so that startups have an opportunity to challenge and disrupt. Why now? What is the urgency around innovation today as compared to 2, 5, 10 years ago? I think the now has more to do with me than it does with the market. I have been doing this for a long time. I have worked across both startups and large corporate organizations. And so I started Innovate, Disrupt, or Die as a way to share some of my learnings and hopefully to encourage people to think very carefully about why innovation is challenging and what might need to change within their organization to better enable innovation to happen. And the data is there. Companies that successfully integrate an innovative mindset and a culture of innovation into their organization see massively greater returns on their investment into new technologies. They see greater shareholder value generated, but not because they're focused on shareholder value. It's because they're focused on creating a business that is sustainable, that has longevity, and that can, for lack of better terms, keep up with the times, which then ultimately results in greater value. What can people expect from Innovate, Disrupt, or Die as a newsletter and as a podcast going forward? So the newsletter is where I started. It is still relatively new. I think we're 8 months in now, and we've released probably 50, 55 editions of the newsletter. And to be blunt, the audience is still relatively small. And so part of what I'm hoping for the newsletter is continued growth. And with that continued feedback, my goal is not to be sharing ideas into the ether, but rather getting feedback from people who are in the innovation space, who are working in the trenches every day and gaining a clearer understanding of the things that might help them better accomplish their jobs, either as an innovator or as a founder or a disruptor. And it's that kind of line of thinking that really led to the podcast as well. The newsletter gets written in a bit of a vacuum around what I find interesting and what I think might resonate, but the podcast is conversational. I'm talking to myself this time, but in the future, all of the podcast episodes will have guests. We've already recorded, I believe, the first 8 episodes, and we've got a really nice mix of people coming from the innovation world, people in innovation roles at larger organizations, people who are the first innovation hire at their company. And then, of course, we talk to folks that are in startup roles, founders who are sitting in that disruption seat and trying to change the way that things are done. And my hope is that we can all learn from one another, and that the folks that come on the podcast will ultimately challenge me and force me to think more deeply and more carefully about my views on innovation, in the same way that I hope I'm challenging other people's views on innovation and providing some value in terms of how to make innovation something that isn't just a talking point, but rather is a point of action within organizations. What kinds of guests, companies, topics, like what are you planning on covering? What's the most interesting thing that you want to feature or talk about? Obviously, we are focused on innovation, disruption, and venture building, and sort of all of the things that are encompassed underneath that. So startups, the way that companies operate, processes within organizations large and small that enable innovation. Our guests come from all walks of life within the world of business and how they relate to innovation. So I had a wonderful interview with the chief innovation officer for a company called On Track Health, which is using AI-driven digital twins to create value-based care in primarily mental health care. Super interesting conversation. I spoke with the head of the New York Applied Innovation Exchange from Capgemini. His role is primarily connecting startups and corporations within their network to help make interesting collaborations happen, which I think is a really cool way to cultivate and foster innovation and leverage the benefits of both larger organizations and the disruptive startups in ways that can be beneficial to both. I've spoken to a founder building effectively Canva for video, really close friend as well. So that was a fun conversation. And the list goes on. So I think that the guests and the topics vary a bit based on the interests of each individual guest, but ultimately it's an opportunity for me to learn from people that are also in the space and doing this day in and day out. What are the books, the resources, the thinkers, the frameworks that have most shaped your perspective on an approach to innovation? So many books. I go through these bouts of sort of voracious reading, and of late it has been just about any book with innovation in the title. And I'm looking over here because I have this giant stack of about 50 books sitting to my left that I've been working my way through. And so, some are rereads. Innovator's Dilemma was one of the earliest and most prolific innovation books. I actually find Innovator's Solution more interesting and more tangible. The Innovator's Method, I think, was a really interesting read on how Christensen's ideas of innovation sort of collide with Eric Ries and Steve Blank's world of the lean startup. The Illusion of Innovation is a relatively recent release that was a really good read. Elliot Parker does a great job of sort of diving into what the constraints around innovation are, particularly within large organizations. So yes, many, many books. Interestingly, I'm finding that online resources and kind of communities around the innovation space are somewhat difficult to find. And so I think that there's an opportunity in that to begin cultivating that around the Innovate, Disrupt, or Die audience. And if anybody's listening and is interested in that, by all means, please, give me a shout, because I'm still sort of mentally chewing on the best way to bring that to life, but getting some validation there that people would be interested in a community-driven space would help kind of light the fire under my butt and get some action going. What do you believe is one behavior or mindset that separates real innovators, for whatever that means, from the rest of the crowd? I'm going to come back to something that I nodded to a moment ago, which is culture of innovation. To me, building a culture of innovation, and by that I mean building an environment within your organization where people understand the value of taking risks, of experimenting, of questioning the status quo, and furthermore are free to do so. You know, if you don't allow people to feel confident and comfortable in their ability to experiment, to question, to try, to take risks, nobody will. And if people aren't doing that, then you have cut off the innovation faucet. Okay, last question. If Innovate, Disrupt, or Die does what you want it to do, what you've set out to create, what do you think will change? People who are part of the Innovate, Disrupt, or Die community gain nothing else from what we are putting out into the world. The idea that they need to be cultivating a culture of innovation and building a space where people have the freedom to innovate would be the absolute most important thing that I think could change for people who are interested in this space. Danny, it's been a great conversation. Really interesting to hear from you, especially because you're me. Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will continue to talk to myself on a daily basis and look forward to talking to other people as well. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. Join us again for our next episode, and don't forget to subscribe at innovatedisruptordie.com. That's all, folks.